Hi, everyone, and welcome to Great Professional Association's webinar titled Growing a Successful Consulting Business. This is part 2 of the series, So You Want to Be a Consultant. My name is Kelly Romero, and I'm the Membership Director for GPA and today's webinar moderator. You are placed in mute, listen-only mode, which means that you are on mute. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat box on your screen to submit your questions. We will get to as many questions as time permits. At the end of the webinar, you will be directed to a brief survey. We ask that you stay on with us until you see that survey to help give us ideas for future webinars as well as critique this webinar. Today's presenter is Linda Lizakowski. Linda is one of approximately 100 professionals worldwide to hold the Advanced Certified Fundraising Executive designation, that's ACFRE. In her 19 years as a philanthropic consultant, she has managed capital campaigns, helped dozens of nonprofit organizations achieve their development goals, and trained more than 22,000 professionals in all aspects of development. Linda is an AFP Certified Master Trainer and serves on the board of the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy. Susan Schaefer is was our other presenter, and she is actually unable to make it today, so it will be Linda presenting. Linda, if you would like to dial *7 to unmute your line, please feel free to begin your presentation.
Okay, can everyone hear?
Yes, we can.
Okay? Okay, it looks like I'm unmuted. Okay, well, great. It's good to be here this morning, or probably afternoon for many of you, depending on where you're located. And I apologize for my partner in crime, Susan, but she had a little bit of a medical emergency, nothing real serious, but just couldn't make it today. So you're stuck with me for the day, but I think we'll get through this. And certainly if you have questions that we don't get to today, I do want to remind you that I know sometimes you're on a limited time and you have to hang up at the end of the hour, but if you have some questions that you don't get a chance to ask today during today's webinar, feel free to email me or Susan. I'll give you both of our emails at the end of the presentation, and if you have a copy of the slides downloaded already, you'll have probably seen our email, so feel free to email either one of us individually after we make this presentation. So let's start with a little bit of a poll. I wanted to kind of get an idea, and I guess I need to update my bio because I'm actually been consulting more than 20 years, but we'd like to sort of get a feeling from the audience as to whether you've been consulting for more than a year, 6 months to a year, or less than 6 months, or just thinking about it. So if you want to give us a chance to look at how long you've been consulting, I think that will help us. Okay, so we have some people who have been consulting for more than a year, some who are just thinking about it. So it looks like we have kind of a mixed bag here. You can see the results. About 40% or over a year, and about 40% are still thinking about consulting, and some of you are 6 months to a year, about 20%. We have nobody that's less than 6 months, so nobody that's a brand new beginner. But I think no matter where you are in your consulting career, hopefully today's session will help, and I think just being able to dialogue with other consultants is often helpful. A lot of times you're kind of maybe reluctant to share with other consultants that are right in your area because you may think, well, they're my competition, and do I want to share too much with them? So this is an opportunity where you can type in your questions and ask a group of people that maybe aren't really considered competition for you, and I think that is often very helpful. So let's go on and talk a little bit about how do you keep your business robust? What do you do when business is slow in your particular neck of the woods? So I think there's a lot of things that you can do when your business is slow. One of them is to network as much as possible with other consultants, and networking with potential clients, doing all those things really helps you a lot. Lots of times you might want to think about looking to a partner and subcontract with other consultants. There are many people who start out this business by themselves, and once they've been in doing this for quite a while, then they start thinking about, gosh, my business is really booming and things are starting to grow. Maybe it's time to either hook up with a partner and form a partnership, or maybe it's time to just think about, gosh, maybe I need to hire some people as staff persons. Some other things that you might want to think about doing is looking at new goals. Oftentimes people look at expanding the services that they're currently operating. They may be doing strictly grant writing in the beginning, but then they find that people are asking them to help with program evaluation, or people are asking them to help with board development, or people are asking them to help with other aspects of fundraising in addition to the grant writing. So many times it's working towards new goals. And I think it's really important that we think about being successful consultants and projecting ourselves as successful consultants at all times. So if you're thinking about contracting with other consultants or forming a partnership, there's a lot of things to think about in that regard, but all of those things we'll talk a little bit about throughout our presentation. So one of the things that I think you should think about is, as far as keeping your business robust, what should you be doing when your business is good? A lot of times I think the biggest issue that many consultants have to deal with is how they can continue marketing and still be servicing the clients that they're already working with. This is probably one of the most challenging balancing acts that most consultants face at some time in their career, and for some consultants, it's most of their career, they're faced with, gosh, I don't have time to get out and market. I have plenty of business now, and maybe they even think they don't need to market their business. But then what happens is all of a sudden all those client contracts come to an end, sometimes all at one time, and then you have no business to deal with. So you really need to think about that marketing all the time, and you should always be thinking about marketing to new clients, even when you're so busy that you feel you can barely handle the ones that you have. I think it's also important to think about creating those backup plans when you do end up in a situation where you might have too much business for yourself. That's probably a situation that some of you who are newer to this think is a dream. Maybe this is the ideal world. But for some of us, it really is a practical matter that sometimes we get so tied up with our clients, and they all have conflicting demands. They all have deadlines due at the same time. So this is when you might think about partnering with other consultants. And you can do this either on a formal basis or an informal basis. I know in my career, I started my business by myself. I had one employee when I started, and he did most of the database work and just support functions for me. But then I started finding that things were getting really busy, and I started by hiring subcontractors. That was the first thing I did in my business, was engage some subcontractors who I could get to both help me market the business and also to help handle some of the clients that were coming in, because I knew that if I wanted the business to grow, there's only so many hours in the week, and there's only so many hours that each of us can devote to our businesses. So we have to look at what are some of the other channels. Hiring full-time staff people is a huge responsibility. So most of us don't hire full-time staff people unless we've really been in business for a long time and we feel very confident in doing that, because once you hire a full-time staff person, then you need to think about salaries and benefits and workman's compensation and unemployment insurance, and there's a lot of factors to deal with. Even with subcontractors, you have to deal with a lot of those things, because I know depending on what state you're in, some states are going to make you require to get workman's compensation on your subcontractors. Even if you don't pay them a salary, they're still going to require that. So you have to check into all of those legal issues and see what your state is going to require. So some people like to actually partner with others, either on a one-off occasion. Maybe you just have one big project and you think, gosh, I can handle this on my own, but I'm not ready to jump into a formal partnership with anyone yet. So they might choose to just hook up with another consultant for a specific project, just like a nonprofit collaborates with other nonprofits maybe to get a specific grant. You can do the same thing in your business where you might decide to partner with another consultant just to work on some big project. If that partnership works out, and I think this is a great way to test out a potential collaboration with other consultants, because sometimes forming a partnership before you realize what all the ramifications are of a partnership, you might find that you can't work with the other person on a long-term basis. Maybe you can work with them on a short-term basis, but sometimes a long-term relationship might not be in the cards. I did have a business partner for a while, and it was actually a good working relationship because we built on each other's strengths. I did not have as much experience in the grant proposal writing as she did, and she wanted to expand beyond grant writing to do some other things. So we made a good partnership team because I had a little more experience in things like capital campaigns, corporate appeals, and working with individual major donors than she had. So we worked out a good partnership arrangement, but our personalities were very different and in some ways complementary. But one of the good things about that partnership was that we were in two different states, so we didn't work with each other on a day-to-day basis because I found that my personality was kind of the type A. I like to get everything done 6 months in advance, and she liked to do everything at the last minute. And both of those personality traits can come in handy in the consulting practice, but sometimes you might find it really difficult to work with someone. So after a couple of years, we decided that maybe this partnership wasn't going the way we wanted it to because one of us wanted to grow the business and the other one kind of wanted to shrink the business back some. So you have to think about all of these things when you get into a long-term relationship with another partner. So you may just find it easier to refer business to other consultants, and this is why networking is so important. If you have a network, not just of potential clients, but a network of other consultants, you might find that referring business to someone else really pays off in the long run for you because you don't have to turn away a client totally. You can refer them to someone that you feel confident in and that you trust. That's why it's good to build up a working relationship with other consultants. And in my practice, I have found that even though we might think, gosh, well, why would I want to help another consultant because they're a competitor, I have found that sometimes mentoring other consultants has actually led me to business for myself because oftentimes building up a relationship with other consultants can really help solidify your expertise in some area. And the more people that know about your expertise, the more likely it is that they're going to refer you to clients. And I still today get a number of clients through referrals from other consultants who either don't do the type of work I do. I have a lot of consultants who are good at certain areas of fundraising, but they've never done a capital campaign. So if they know someone wants a capital campaign, first person they think of is, let's call Linda and maybe she can help them. So referring business back and forth to other consultants can be really helpful for your business in many ways. First of all, it relieves the burden of too much business at one time, but also those referrals might come back to you when you are in a situation where you don't have any business because all your client contracts ended. So all of those areas, I think, are worthwhile investigating for you. Another thing that you might want to think about is it might be time to rethink your business model. Maybe it's time to think about expanding geographically. If you've only consulted in one city or one county or one region of a state, maybe it's time to go statewide or even national, possibly even international. I know a lot of consultants really like doing international work, and they like the travel opportunities that are apparent with those type of things. So you might want to think about maybe it's time to expand geographically because especially if your focus is narrow, maybe you only do grant writing for higher education. Well, there's only going to be certain amount of higher education clients in your community, and sometimes they're competing with each other, so you might not want to think about looking solely in your own community, but you might want to think about working with other areas. I do see a question in the chat box that I think I'm going to answer now because it came up based on something I just said earlier. If your clients are used to working with you, how do they feel about subcontracting some of the work, and how is it discussed with a client? I think that's a really great question. One of the things that I did when I had subcontractors, and now I've kind of backed off my business, so I don't deal with many subcontractors anymore, but at one point in time, I would have as many as 8 or so at one time. And one of the things that I found is if I was working with subcontractors, when a client opportunity came up, I would ask those subcontractors to assist with the marketing. And so I would take them on the initial call with the client so the client knew right away who they were going to be working with. I think that's really important. In some areas, probably more than others. In grant writing, it might not be as crucial because some of the work that you're doing is really writing and off-site, and maybe you can subcontract the writing out, and the client might not even know that you're not the one doing the writing. But with the kind of work that I did, which was mostly things like capital campaigns and that type of thing, I would take that subcontractor with me on the initial call, introduce them to the client right away so the client didn't feel like they were being pulled a bait and switch. And sometimes I found with some of the larger consulting firms have done that, where they have people who are basically salespeople. They'll go out and make the initial contact, close the deal, and then it gets handed off to somebody else, and all of a sudden the client is saying, well, oh, I thought I was going to be working with so-and-so, and now I'm working with this person. And I think that can really leave a bad taste in the client's mouth. I know one particular group that I'm familiar with, I was not the consultant on this, but I had heard about it, that there was an agency that hired a very large consulting firm, and they sent 2 consultants out because it was a pretty big project. It was about a $30 million capital campaign. And one of the consultants was fairly new. The other one had a lot more experience. And so the client thought they were going to be working with this person that had a lot more experience. And then it turned out that this agency got a bigger contract in another state across the country, and they pulled this more senior consultant out to work on that project and left the new consultant in charge of the existing client with a $30 million project. And needless to say, they didn't, but they weren't too particularly happy that they got their consultant pulled to go work on a $100 million campaign, because they felt $30 million was a lot of money for them, and they wanted to work with the consultants that they were accustomed to working with. So I think that's a really important question. And I think that's really a good question, that you should discuss this with the client if you're going to be subcontracting some of the work. In fact, I've worked with some clients where my contract actually states, some especially like state-owned organizations, that actually state that the client has to approve any subcontract that you're going to work with. So you want to make sure that that is up front with the client right away, who's going to be doing the work. So let's go back to talking a little bit about expanding your business model. Another thing that you might think about is maybe you're just tired of one type of business. And I know a consultant friend of mine did a lot of strategic planning, and she just got sick and tired of doing strategic planning, so she decided to focus her energy somewhere else. And so she just went about taking strategic planning off her website, any of her promotional materials, and she just didn't talk about strategic planning for a long time, and she did other areas of fundraising. And then after a while, she said, I really enjoy that strategic planning. I think I miss it. So she went back, and it was easy for her to go back into it because all she did was add it back to her website, started promoting it again and talking to people, and she was able to recover some strategic planning clients. So you can expand your services. You might decide that, you'd really like to try your hand at capital campaigns. If you've never done a capital campaign, my advice to you is this is where you partner with someone who has done it, or you subcontract someone that might be interested in helping you that has experience in that, because you can't just jump from one service to another without having a credibility attached to it and without having some experience in that area. I'm always a little nervous when I see ads for big consulting firms that say they're hiring consultants and they want 1 or 2 years experience. And I think, how can somebody with 1 or 2 years of nonprofit experience actually serve as a consultant? So I think it is important that if you're going to expand services, that you make sure you have someone with the knowledge in those services. The other thing that you might think about doing is expanding your client base. I mentioned earlier that sometimes people are focused in a specific target area. So maybe you have always worked in the arts, and so all your clients are arts clients. And at some point in time, you might say, geez, I'm really kind of sick and tired of working with arts clients, or somebody approaches you and says, would you be able to help me with a healthcare agency? So expanding your client base is another possibility for you. Again, those people who are accustomed to you and know your experience in certain particular areas are probably going to keep thinking of you in that area. So the best thing to do is really get out and find one strong client in another area, whether it's human services, the arts, education, healthcare, whatever, advocacy, whatever group you want to expand into, and start really getting familiar with that whole nature of that business, because every area has a different kind of a unique little twist to it, and so the terminology might be unfamiliar to you. You might have to immerse yourself a little bit in the terminology and things like that, and the culture of different organizations may be very different. You might think about changing your business structure. I have to tell you that I started my business as a subchapter S corporation, and I've changed names 3 times now. And I've recently changed the structure of my business to be an LLC, because when I started my business more than 20 years ago, there were no such things as LLCs in the state I was incorporated in, so my accountant recommended a sub-S corporation. But I find that many people now are doing LLCs, and I think that seems to be a very common business structure. And I'm not an attorney or an accountant, so I'm not here to give you advice on how you should structure your business, but look into the different things and talk to attorneys and accountants and find out what is the best for you. So you might be at a point where if you've always been a sole proprietor, you might, especially when you're taking on subcontractors, you might feel that you have more of a liability and you don't want to be a sole proprietor, because then that liability could become a personal liability. You might be thinking about adding staff, and again, this is a big decision for you. Do you add staff, or do you subcontract, or do you partner with other consultants? Adding staff, as I said, has a lot of responsibilities with it, so that usually is one of the things that people, only after they've been in business for a pretty long time period, think about hiring actual salaried staff. Some of you may even be thinking about shrinking your business, as I did in the last year or two. I've had some health issues to deal with, and so I decided I really didn't want to travel as much as I did, so I've kind of shrunk my business now that I'm focused more on local clients than I ever was before. I've always worked on a national level, and so I focus more of my energies on teaching and writing and things like that as both supplemental income sources and also as a way to keep my hand in the business and stay active and still maintain a way to help people with their issues, but not doing as much one-on-one consulting. Probably no one on this call is at the point where they're ready to retire yet, although maybe someone is. So that's another thing to think about, and you shouldn't think about it when you all of a sudden are at the age of 65 and say, gee, is it time to retire or not? But you need to start thinking about those things early on, because if you are thinking about retiring, maybe that's time to start by shrinking your business, maybe focusing on one particular type of agency, or focusing on a smaller geographic region, or adding staff or subcontractors that might eventually take over your business if that's in the cards. I know one consultant who contributed to our consulting playbook. When he was getting close to retirement age, he took on a much younger partner, and they slowly turned the business over at, like maybe it was 10%, 90%, and then by the time they were finished, it was 50. It was 50-50, and then 60-40, and eventually it became 100% the younger partner's business. So those are things to think about in advance as well. So let's take another little poll and just kind of see what some of you might be thinking about. How many of you are thinking about expanding geographically or expanding your services or expanding your client base, changing your business structure, shrinking your business, or maybe even retiring, and just see where everyone is. Okay. Looks like we're getting some good answers in here. And I was right. Nobody's as old as I am. They're not thinking about shrinking their business or retiring yet. Okay, so it looks like most of you are at the stage where you're thinking about either adding staff or subcontractors, expanding your client base and expanding services, and some of you are thinking about expanding geographically. So I kind of thought maybe I would find that not too many of you were interested in shrinking your business, but that is something that you might think about in the future. Okay, so let's move on and talk about some of the things, and I'll spend most of this time on talking about the areas that most of you agreed to, so that's why I wanted to do that little poll. Expanding geographically, some questions that you really need to ask yourself is how much travel you want to do. And originally when I started my business, traveling was a lot of fun. Of course, 20-some years ago, I started my business obviously before September 11th of 2001, and we didn't have to go through as much hassle as we do today when we're traveling. So I think it's good to think about that. Not only how much traveling you want to do, but where do you want to travel to? I still think about those things when I'm approached to do speaking, although I'm not doing much consulting nationally anymore, but when I'm called to speak, there are some places that really are much more appetizing. Like earlier this year, or last year, I guess, early in 2013, I was invited to speak in Bermuda, and I thought, well, I've never been to Bermuda. That sounds like a great place to go. But sometimes there are times when you don't want to be on a plane 7 days in a row, as I was about 2 years ago. One summer, I know I spent 7 days in a row on airplanes and thinking that even the flight attendants get a day off, and why didn't I? So you have to think about those things. And you also have to think about whether you have prospective clients in those regions. How are you going to reach those networks? If you're active in GPA and attend the conferences and you know a lot of people through GPA, then you might have some good avenues to reach into some of these other regions. But if you don't have prospective clients or contacts, you're going to have to spend a lot of time doing marketing, building lists, and making those networks and those contacts. So those are things to think about. And then you also have to think about that registration requirements that about 40% of or 40 states in the United States require registration of consultants before they can do business in that state. So you need to think about that. It can be not only very time-consuming, but also very costly. And unless you're working with clients that are pretty big type of agencies, you might not be capable of handling all that registration. I am going to jump back and answer another question here. I'm wondering whether you recommend staying with one agency type or diversifying right away. I think both could have chances of long-term sustainability. I think it's more a decision of your area of interest and your expertise and what you enjoy doing. I personally like the variety of working with a lot of different type of clients. I've never focused on strictly education or healthcare or the arts because I really like the variety of work. So a lot of it has to do with your personality and what you enjoy. But if you're the type of person who really likes being a specialist and you want to be the go-to person for the Sierra clubs in the country or whatever, then I think that's a choice that you have to make on your own. The long-term sustainability, I think the only issue with focusing on one particular area is what I mentioned earlier, that if you have especially of higher education, you're only going to have so many clients that you can deal with. But if you're doing work like grant writing, where your clients are going to be long-term, it might be fine to deal with only higher education because those people are going to be hiring you year after year after year. If you're doing things like capital campaigns, some organizations don't do another capital campaign for 20 more years, and that's not going to be very sustainable if you stick to doing capital campaigns for higher education, for example, unless you're willing to travel to a lot of different regions. So I think a lot of it depends on your personality as well as the long-term sustainability. So let's move on and talk about expanding services. Not too many people said they were thinking about doing this, so I don't want to spend too much time. But you should think about things that what you're really good at, what you can learn, and also, again, what you like doing. If you can do the things that you like and still expand through subcontractors, partnership, or hiring employees, then, maybe you can expand your services. But if you really don't want to go into the subcontractors, partners, and employees, then maybe you should just stick to the one area that you feel that you're really good at. You also might want to think about some passive income streams. Can you charge for things other than your time? For example, writing. Some people, now blogs and things aren't income generating. People do those kind of things because it helps generate business. But you might be able to, for example, I'm a member of For Good, and I have a number of packages that I've put together that I sell on there at a reasonable price, and people will pay for them because they need to have sample job descriptions or a sample needs assessment or whatever it is that you're going to post. So you might want to think about that. Writing books typically doesn't get you extremely rich, but it does for many people help open doors for clients because once you're a published author, people tend to look at you in a different light and they think, oh, this person must be an expert because some publisher decided that they were worthwhile approaching. Teaching is another way. Many people are doing now e-courses, webinars, or teaching traditional classes. Maybe your local community college or some of your local colleges and universities might have classes that you can teach. And this is good for sustainability because it, again, is often more long-term. I do probably a lot of webinars, and many of which I get paid for, and I do some traditional courses and some e-courses and things like that. Speaking at conferences is also another option. Some conferences will pay speakers, others don't, so you have to investigate that. And you have to make your decisions based on, are you trying to make money doing this, or are you trying to increase your business? And if you're trying to increase your business, then you're probably much more likely to go speak at a free conference than you are if you're trying to make money at it, obviously. Some people sell things like membership programs or proprietary products. I have a friend who developed a fundraising game similar to Monopoly, and she sells that game online through her website. People have membership in, I was offering, and I still am offering this through the For Good channel, a fundraiser's private vault where people had access to a whole bunch of, like hundreds of forms that I developed along the years of consulting, and people can pay an annual fee and belong to that fundraiser's private vault. So those are some things that you might want to look into, and some consultants have really done a fantastic job of this and are making more money at these passive income streams than they are in their consulting practice. Expanding your client base is something that you might want to think about. Again, what kind of clients do you currently have, and what kind do you want to have? And then what are the best sources of referrals to those new clients? So let's say that you've always focused in higher education and you're active in CASE. Well, that's great for higher education, but if you want to expand into the arts and the environment and healthcare, then you might have to look at other associations that you want to join, or maybe you want to just stay active in a group like GPA or AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. What's the best source of clients to the clients that you want to have? And I think that's really important that you determine what clients you really want to have. Who's the ideal client for you? Do you want the long-term relationship, or do you want the person who's just going to hire you to come in and help you set up a program for that? Those are the kind of things that I think are really important, because expanding your client base could be done through word of mouth. For many consultants, I think that's really a case of getting their clients to spread the word to other potential clients. Social media marketing is huge. I think everybody these days has a website, and lots of people are doing things through Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of things. Some consultants are really excellent at this. Others say, I just don't have time for it and I don't want to do it. And that's fine. You have to decide what's the right mix for you. I have personally found that professional associations and speaking and writing were always really great sources of business for me, besides word of mouth. And, of course, client referrals and consultant referrals have always been big. But I've gotten a lot of clients through my speaking and writing. I have a client right now that hired me because she went to the AFP conference in Vancouver, Canada, bought a couple books, and when she got home found out that I happened to live in Las Vegas, and that's where her agency was located. And she called me and said, oh, my goodness, I had no idea you lived here. Can I hire you? And that it was as simple as that. That sounds pretty simple, but it really honestly did happen that way. So getting out and networking at professional associations, I think, is one of the great ways to expand your client base, attending the GPA conferences and things like that. I see a question here that I'm going to kind of defer until the end, because it does say it's a challenging question, so I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Changing business structure, I don't think anybody was too interested in doing this, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I think I have already covered, you can be a corporation, you can be a C Corp, which I don't know of any consultants who are C Corps, although maybe some of the larger ones are. S corporations, partnerships, and LLCs. Those are the things that seem to be the most common ways, but I'm not going to get into that since it didn't seem to be of too much interest. A lot of you were talking about hiring staff or subcontractors, so I do want to spend a few minutes talking about this, because I think this was a really important topic that people were debating about, and sometimes it's really hard to know what are the implications of each of these categories. And I know that I've talked to some consultants who say to me that they themselves, they're not even talking about people that they're hiring, they themselves are a contracted employee of a client. And I said, well, wait a minute, there is no such thing as a contracted employee. You're either an employee or you're a contractor. You can't be both. And the IRS has some very strict guidelines on that. And I'm not going to remember every one of them, but I think they have about 25 different points that say, if this, and this are true, then you're an employee. And one of them is giving people business cards. So if your client says, well, we're going to give you a business card, and we're going to give you an office, and we're going to tell you what time to show up at work and what time to leave and everything like that, then you're an employee. And some nonprofits I have found have tried to get away without paying employment taxes by saying, oh, well, they're really subcontractors. Well, if they have an office and a business card and you tell them when to work and you are directing all their work, then they're an employee. So you want to check that. And, again, I'm not an attorney or an accountant, but check the IRS website, because there is a place on there where you can find out what they consider an employee versus a subcontractor. But you might have to deal with this yourself, because if you're having people that come into your office every day and report to work, and you're supplying them all the equipment that they need, the desk and the computers and everything else, and the business cards, then they're probably considered employees of yours. If they are working out of their own home and they're doing their own payroll, they're handling their own income tax and things like that, then they're probably going to qualify as a subcontractor. So you need to be aware of those kind of things so that you know what all the issues are. You also need to be aware of that unemployment and workman's comp issues, because, as I said, even if these people are considered subcontractors. If they don't carry their own workman's comp insurance, you're probably going to have to pay for it. So these are some expenses that you need to think about. You also need to think about whether the staff is going to be on site, and even if they're employees, they could still work out of a virtual office. I know at one point in time I had an office, and after I moved from Pennsylvania to Nevada, I maintained my office, and I had several employees who were working there. But then my employees started saying to me, well, you know, I have 3 kids, and my kids are sick today. I want to work at home today. And another one was saying, gosh, you know, I'd really rather work at home than work here. So I finally gave up my offices, and even my employees worked out of a virtual office. So telecommuting can work even with employees. Finding the right people to be staff or contractors is probably one of the biggest challenges that people have to deal with when it comes to hiring the right people. And I think one of the things that if you're going to work with subcontractors is you need to know what you want those people to do. Do you want them to be out marketing with you and for you, or do you want to do all the marketing yourself and then just hand over the business to someone else? And again, this goes back to what is your personality. Some consultants, I think, really fail at this business because although they're very good at what they do and they've been experts in their field and their clients love the work that they do, but they don't know how to market themselves, or they don't enjoy marketing, or they don't enjoy the business end of it. One of the things that I learned early on, that even though I spent 11 years in banking, was that I really didn't enjoy the financial end of running my business. So very early on, I hired a staff person to do the bookkeeping, the taxes, the payroll, and all of that, because I found that it was taking me probably 20 hours a week to do what a professional who was just doing that alone could do in 10 hours a week. So you have to find the people that really meet the qualities that you're looking for. If you want them to be good at marketing, then make sure you're looking at people and knowing that they have the ability to get out and talk to a client and to sell your business for you. If you're looking at somebody that has to be really detail-oriented and somebody that you're going to just assign projects to and say, okay, I need you to write this grant, or I need you to do this research, again, make sure that you're dealing with people who have the abilities that you need. Sometimes people think about interns. If you can find one that's an unpaid intern, that's really ideal. I find a lot of colleges and universities now are looking more at paid internships, but I did have a college intern. It was actually an adult, a woman that was close to my own age, but she was going to school as an adult, and she needed to do an internship, and her field was marketing, and I needed somebody to help me with marketing, so I brought her in, and she did an internship at no cost to me at all. I just had to make reports back to the university as to what she was doing, and it was a really great help for me, and it really helped me get over some of the things. I think now if I were going to hire an intern, what I would do is look for somebody who has experience in social media, because that's something that I find way too time-consuming. So if you can find a college intern, and probably you can find a 12-year-old that can help you with social media. So you might have to deal with labor laws there, but if it's your own child, you might be able to convince them to help you do that. And lots of times I think you can get people to help you with projects that are either short-term or on a long-term relationship, helping you do some of the things that maybe you're not as good at. Okay, I'm going to move on, and then I'll get back to some of the questions that are in the screen when we get to the question and answer session. But I wanted to move on to the next thing. Again, I won't spend too much time on here about shrinking your business or retiring, because no one really seemed to be too interested in this. But you might be thinking about this as you're in business in the future. So I think I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about, you might find that after you're in this business, and some of you who are in the business for a couple of years or more might already be finding that you're just ready for a slower pace, or maybe you're just sick of doing all the traveling that you're doing. Maybe you want to have more time to teach or write. That was one of the big influences for me, is I found that once I wrote my first book 10 years ago, I got hooked, and now I've written about 12 of them, if not more. And I really enjoy the teaching and the writing, so that was a big issue for me. Some of you who have families are probably thinking that just balancing your work and home life might be an issue for you. A lot of people go into consulting thinking, oh boy, I don't have to work 9 to 5 anymore, and my time is my own. And yes, that's true up to a point. Your time is your own. But on the other side of that coin, you really need to think about the fact that, well, while your time is your own, consulting, most consultants I know are working at least 60 hours a week, probably more, and sometimes at really odd hours because they might have clients that expect them to be at an evening event, or they might have clients that want to meet at 7 o'clock in the morning, and maybe they have kids to get off to school, and are we going to be able to balance all of this? So for some of you, balancing just, your work and home life might be enough of an issue that this might be a reason for you to think about kind of shrinking your business down or maybe hiring more people. The other thing is, some people are really thinking about leaving a legacy. Maybe you want to build up the business and sell it eventually to someone else so that you have that income for your retirement. Or maybe you want to pass your business along to your children if they're interested in what you're doing. I know a lot of consultants that have family members working for them. I was never fortunate enough that any of my children wanted to go into what I was doing. They probably saw how many hours I worked and said, forget it. But I think a lot of times people do want to leave a legacy for their family. So that can either be done by building up a business and selling it. It can be done by building up that passive income that we talked about, or it can be done through passing your business along maybe to family members. So how do you survive and thrive in this business? Well, I think there's a lot of different areas that we can talk about. One is flexibility. I mentioned that I've changed my business structure once. I've changed my name 3 times. Actually, I've changed my business structure twice because I had a partnership. So I had a subchapter S, and then I had a partnership along with the subchapter S, and now I have an LLC corporation. So that was flexible. I changed my name 3 times to go along with those changes in structure. I started my business as Cornerstone Consulting, Inc., and then when I became a partnership, we decided we wanted to focus our energies more on capital campaigns, so we changed the partnership name was Capital Venture. And then after 20 years in business, I decided to do something that I never thought I would do when I started my business, but my new company is Linda Lizakowski, LLC. I never thought I wanted to just use my own name because I always thought people who used their own names in business meant they didn't have any imagination and they couldn't think of a good name. But now I've decided that after 20-some years in business, people recognize my name probably more than my business name. So I have changed my name. So that's flexibility, I guess, for sure. Keeping your marketing pipeline full is really critical. I mentioned this before, but I think when it comes to making sure that you have time to serve your clients and do the marketing, if you can't do both, then think about who you can engage to do one of those things for you. Either hire somebody that can help you with the marketing, or subcontract some of the client work so you can do the marketing. Again, it depends on your personality and your strengths and your expertise. Mentors and coaches, I think, are really important for any consultant, no matter what stage of your consulting business you're in. When you're new at this, I would always suggest trying to find a mentor, and you can find mentors on your own. I'm not sure if GPA has a formal mentorship program, but I know that AFP does. And I actually last year was asked to mentor somebody who was starting a consulting business. And I thought, well, this is a little odd because I'm a consultant. I'm still active. But it actually has worked out really great because she's referred people to me, and I've referred people to her, and it worked out to be a good relationship. So if you're starting out in this, look for a mentor or a coach. And if you're in this business any length of time, consider being a mentor because it can be rewarding both personally and professionally, I think, for you. And always, always, always continue that professional development. Even if you're in this business a long time, we still don't know it all. And so I always try to attend the GPA conferences and the AFP conferences, and there's a number of ways that you can get professional development through reading, through taking courses, through attending conferences. But I find that those are some of the best ways that I can really gain my professional development, is just getting out to conferences and networking with other people as well. Before we go to questions, I did want to mention to you that you can email both Susan and I at actually Lizakowski-Schaefer at charitychannel.com. That will go to both of us, and we will be happy to answer any questions that we don't get to today. I did want to mention our book in case you haven't picked it up, and that's our nonprofit consulting playbook, which I've made references to some of the consultant stories that are in this book. But we have 25 different leaders in the field, all of whom have been in business at least 10 years. And also, Susan and I offer one-on-one coaching for aspiring new or veteran consultants, so you can feel free to email me about those things. But I want to get back to some of the questions that were in the chat box. And if you have some questions that you haven't put in there, feel free to add those now as we go along. The first one I think that I didn't get to was, I know this is a challenging question, but do you have a sense of the potential income for the most successful consultants? I realize GPA has a survey, but it's hard to separate the more successful from the not. And I think a lot of it probably depends on the type of consulting that you do and a lot of different categories. But I would say that probably most successful, what I would consider successful consultants financially, are probably those who are earning six figures or more. Now, not everybody may be looking to earn a six-figure income. Maybe you're looking at doing consulting part-time or in retirement or something. But I think it's hard to say a dollar figure because a lot of it is based on the type of consulting you do. When my consulting practice was at its peak, my income for the business was probably over $500,000, but I was paying subcontractors and salaries and a lot of other things out of that. So I think it depends on the size of your business and a lot of different things that go into it. Another question was, is there a customary percentage of the client's fee to pay a subcontracted writer? And I haven't used actually writers, but I've used subcontractors, and I've based it on something I learned in a class somewhere that I took, that anytime you're pricing services, you should figure one-third, 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 which means one-third of the salary for the person actually doing the work, one-third for running the business, and one-third for profit, because it's going to be, you're going to have to spend your time overseeing that person and sometimes managing the client work. So that when I say profit, it might not necessarily be, profit on your bottom line, but it's your time and expense. And the one-third that goes for business expenses is you have to pay the registration, the marketing, all of those things. And I know I've dealt with different subcontractors. I usually typically ended up with a 60-40 split rather than the one-third, one-third. So the subcontractor would get 40%. I know some people work on different percentages. And again, look at what your overhead is and what you're paying for, because that's a lot of hidden expenses that you have to pay: the accounting fees, the attorney fees, the bank fees, the marketing fees, the registration fees, all of those kind of things. So you don't want to give the subcontractors more than you're earning, because a lot of times that you end up losing your shirt that way. Another question is, as an alternative, I'm considering consulting during my retirement. I can set how much I want to work, not based on income, and I'm able to do a lot of pro bono work because of my status. I think that's really an interesting aspect, and I think a lot of people do look at consulting when they retire. Many people who have been in the field for a long time period, and I think consulting in your retirement is good. However, I would be cautious about not basing your fees too low, because it's kind of like the rising tide lifts all ship, but I guess the lowering tide can sink ships too. And sometimes if consultants that are doing pro bono work and doing work at a much lower cost than is average in your community, then it kind of hurts other consultants in the long run too. So I think and I also think it lowers your value, even if you say that you're going to do some pro bono work. Like I won't lower my rates, but I do also do some pro bono work. And if a client says to me, gosh, we have this much in our budget, I'll say, well, here's what my fee is, and this is what I'm going to charge you, but then I will contribute X number of hours to you as pro bono work. But I think you need to have some policies in that. I always had a policy that some people I know say they'll do 10% of their work pro bono, or they'll take one pro bono client a year. And I at one point in time even made it a formal grant proposal project where I sent out an e-blast to people saying I'm going to start a program, and it was a group program, a group consulting program that was X number of dollars. But I said I want 10 people in the program, and I'm going to give 2 scholarships. Well, I found out that when I got the grant proposals in from people, that giving away money was a lot harder than raising it was. So I didn't like being on the funder end of it because I had too much difficulty making decisions as to who to give the free pro bono consulting work to. So I ended up giving away more than I had intended to, and I think I gave 4 pro bonos instead of 2. But I think those were really helpful. Somebody has, what's the minimum you charge for consultation? I think that depends a lot on what type of consulting you're looking at doing. I have never charged on an hourly basis, although I do have a daily rate which can be transferred into an hourly basis if I have to. I shouldn't say I've never done it because I think I have 1 or 2 clients that periodically will call me and say, can you just do this one short-term project for me? And I'll figure out, well, I think that's going to take me about 4 hours, so I'm going to charge you $1,000 for it because my daily rate is $2,000. But I think it depends a lot on what kind of consulting you do and also where you're located. If you're located in a bigger metropolitan area like Washington, D.C. or New York or Los Angeles, you'll probably be able to charge more than a consultant in a smaller rural community would. Also, I have to tell you that when I based these, when I was working nationally, I looked at how much it was going to cost me to register in the state I was working in because I refused to work in New York State because their registration fees were so high there. So you have to think of all of those things when you're setting rates as well. So it's really a lot of different factors to take into play. So I think we've gotten through all of the questions that I see in the chat room. We have about a minute or 2 yet, I think, to go. So if anybody has any more questions that you'd like to put into the chat room, feel free. And as I said, if you have some more personal questions, like maybe you want to discuss your individual situation, feel free then to email us at that Lizakowski Schaefer address, and we'll be happy to deal with one-on-one questions as well. Kelly, can you think of anything that you want to add before we close?
No, I don't think so. Actually, there is one more question that just popped up. Can you discuss what your fees are for mentoring?
Okay. Mentoring is we do charge an average rate of $250 an hour for that, but I find that a lot of people really don't need a lot of time. It's maybe an hour a month or so is enough.
Great, thank you. We want to be mindful of everybody's time. So again, if you would like to ask a question after the webinar is over, you can email, as Linda mentioned, the Lizakowski-Schaefer@charitychannel.com, or you can email myself at membership@grantprofessionals.org, and I will get it forwarded over to one of them or both. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Linda?
I want to thank everybody and wish you lots of luck, those of you who are thinking of expanding. And if you have just, like I said, questions that are one-on-one, feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Great. Well, that concludes our webinar. We'd like to ask each of you to remain with us a few moments longer. You should be seeing a short survey on your screen. Please provide us with future topics for our webinars. We have all webinars scheduled up until April, so we're looking to fill any of them after. If you are a presenter of webinars or any workshops at the conference and you'd like to present a topic, we would certainly welcome that. Just simply email me the topic that you wish, and we'll look at getting it scheduled. And Linda, we'd like to thank you for all of your time that you've put into this webinar, all of your information and expertise that you shared. And thanks to all of you who have attended. We're glad that you can join us, and we hope that this session was helpful for you in deciding whether or not you would like to begin your journey as a consultant. Later today, you should be receiving a recorded version of the webinar, and just remember that all active GPA members do receive the entire catalog of all of our live and recorded webinars with your membership. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day, and thanks, Linda.
Bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.